Stupid beta hit pregnant omega. 34 times without knowing then. The powerful Alpha King protects her. Can an Alpha King overcome his deepest fears of vulnerability and choose love over political survival? When protecting his secret mate means revealing a bond that could legitimize his heir or destroy his throne, especially when that child carries the blood of both savior and betrayer, and may possess power too dangerous for any mortal to wield. Chapter 1. The Mask of Power. High Alpha. King Thorne sat upon the obsidian throne of Ebonville, his presence commanding absolute silence from the assembled court. At 32, he ruled through calculated authority rather than inherited right, his steel-gray eyes reflecting the same unyielding strength as the ancient stones surrounding him. The morning's petitions stretched before him like a familiar ritual, disputes over land, requests for justice, the endless machinery of governance that kept kingdoms functioning. Bring forth the next matter, he commanded, his voice carrying the weight of generations who had held this seat before him. A trembling merchant approached, bowing deeply before launching into a complaint about bandits on the western trade routes. Thorne listened with practiced attention, but part of his mind wandered to thoughts he couldn't voice in this public arena. Elizabeth's cottage lay in that direction, hidden among the rolling hills, where exiled nobles lived in quiet disgrace. The irony wasn't lost on him. He who commanded armies and shaped the fate of thousands couldn't openly claim the one person who truly mattered. Their bond remained his most closely guarded secret, a vulnerability he couldn't afford in a world where weakness invited conquest. Double the patrols, he decided, knowing the increased presence would provide better protection for settlements in that region, and ensure proper compensation for losses already sustained. As the merchant departed with obvious relief, Lord Chancellor Avant stepped forward with his daily briefing. Your Majesty, the neighboring kingdoms continue pressing for marriage alliances. Several suitable candidates have been suggested for your consideration. Thorne's jaw tightened imperceptibly. These political machinations felt like chains around his throat, each suggested union another step away from the woman he'd secretly bonded with under the full moon years ago. Such matters require careful deliberation, he replied diplomatically. Continue monitoring these opportunities, but make no commitments. The Chancellor's slight frown suggested disapproval, but Thorne had long since stopped caring about others' expectations regarding his personal life. Chapter 2. The Secret Bond Under Cover of Darkness. Thorne rode alone through the forest paths that led to Elizabeth's hidden cottage. He'd dismissed his guards hours ago, claiming a need for solitary reflection, a half-truth that allowed him these precious stolen moments. The simple stone dwelling appeared ahead, candlelight flickering in windows that promised warmth and acceptance no throne room could provide. Elizabeth opened the door before he could knock. Her enhanced omega senses, having detected his approach long before his horse's hoofbeats became audible. At 26, she possessed a quiet beauty that courtly ladies couldn't match. Genuine grace born from hardship rather than privilege. You shouldn't have come, she whispered, though her arms opened to welcome him. The risks grow greater each time. I had to see you, Thorne replied, pulling her close and breathing in the familiar scent that calmed his alpha instincts like nothing else could. Something's been troubling me. Dreams, perhaps, or intuition. They settled before the modest hearth, where Elizabeth served simple fare that tasted better than any royal feast. Here, stripped of crown and ceremony, he could be simply a man who loved beyond reason. I have news, she said softly, her hand moving instinctively to her still flat stomach. The bond has been fruitful. The words hit him like lightning. A child, their child. The heir he'd never dared hope for, growing within the woman he couldn't publicly claim. Are you certain? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. 3 weeks now. I can feel the life force, stronger than anything I've experienced. Her violet eyes held both joy and fear. What will this mean for us? For the kingdom? Thorne's mind raced through implications that stretched far beyond personal happiness. An unacknowledged heir posed political dangers, but denying their child's legitimacy felt like betraying everything their bond represented. We'll find a way, he promised. Though uncertainty colored his words, I won't let politics destroy what we've built. As dawn approached, He reluctantly prepared to leave, unaware that eyes watched from the forest shadows, eyes that had been tracking his movements for weeks. Chapter 3. The Gathering Storm. The council chamber buzzed with tension as Lord Merrin presented his carefully prepared report. The beta noble commanded attention through calculated ambition rather than inherited authority, his pale eyes sharp with intelligence that bordered on cunning. "Your Majesty," he began, spreading maps across the polished table, "increased bandit activity in the Western Territories threatens trade stability. Several merchant caravans have reported harassment, though thankfully no serious casualties yet." Thorne studied the marked locations with growing unease. The affected region encompassed the exile settlements where Elizabeth lived, a detail that couldn't be coincidental. "What evidence supports these claims?" he asked carefully. "Witness statements, damaged goods, disrupted schedules," Merrin replied smoothly. "The situation requires immediate attention before it escalates beyond our control." Chancellor Yvonde nodded agreement. Perhaps a show of royal force would discourage further incidents. Lord Merrin has volunteered to lead an investigative expedition. The suggestion sent ice through Thorne's veins. Merrin's reputation for harsh methods was well established, and the thought of him operating near Elizabeth's location triggered every protective instinct. "The Western settlements contain political exiles," Thorne observed. "Heavy-handed tactics might create unnecessary complications." "All the more reason for careful investigation," Merrin countered. "Exiled nobles often harbor resentments that could manifest as supporting criminal activities. A thorough examination might reveal broader conspiracies." The logic was sound enough to convince other council members, but something in Merrin's eagerness disturbed Thorne. Still, refusing without clear justification would raise questions he couldn't answer. "Very well," he decided reluctantly. "But remember, these people may be exiled, but they remain subjects of the crown. Treat them accordingly." "Of course, Your Majesty," Merrin replied with a smile that never reached his eyes. As the meeting concluded, Thorne caught Merrin's expression of satisfaction, the look of a man whose plans were proceeding exactly as intended. That evening, alone in his chambers, Thorne wrestled with the urge to send word warning Elizabeth. But any message might be intercepted, potentially exposing their connection. He could only hope his instructions for restraint would prevent disaster. Chapter 4. The Brutal Attack. The messenger burst into the throne room during the evening meal, his clothes torn and face streaked with road dust. "Your Majesty," he gasped, falling to his knees. "Urgent news from the Western settlements." Thorne's blood turned to ice as he recognized the man, one of the village healers who served the exile community. "Speak plainly," he commanded, though dread already gripped his heart. "An Omega has been attacked, sire, beaten nearly to death by Lord Merrin's forces. She was with a child. The babe may not survive." The healer's voice broke. "We've done what we can, but her injuries are severe." The words hit Thorne like physical blows. An Omega. With a child, in the exact region where Elizabeth lived. The mathematics of horror aligned with devastating clarity. "Details," he managed, his voice deadly quiet. "Everything you witnessed." Lord Merrin found her gathering herbs in the forest. She wore simple clothes. He assumed she was a servant. When she couldn't provide information about supposed bandit activities, he lost his temper. The healer's hands shook. 34 strikes with his riding crop. We counted each mark. The throne room spun around Thorne as rage built beyond anything he'd ever experienced. His alpha nature roared for immediate violence, demanding blood to answer blood. Only decades of rigid self-control kept him from transforming on the spot. "Where is Lord Merrin now?" the question emerged as barely controlled growl. "Still in the settlements, my lord." He ordered the woman moved to the healer's lodge under guard, said he'd question her further when she regained consciousness. Thorne rose from his throne, every movement radiating lethal intent. "Ready my fastest horse and a small escort. We ride immediately." "Your Majesty," Chancellor Yvonde protested. "Surely this matter can be handled through proper channels." "Proper channels failed to prevent an Omega from being brutalized on my lands," Thorne snarled. "I'll handle this personally." As servants scrambled to prepare for his departure, Thorne's mind fractured between fear for Elizabeth and their child, and a burning need for vengeance that threatened to consume rational thought. The mask of controlled kingship cracked, revealing the protective alpha beneath. Time became his enemy now. Every moment of delay might cost him everything that mattered. Chapter 5. The Ride to Hell. Thorne pushed his mount beyond safe limits, the miles between castle and western settlements becoming a blur of desperate urgency. His small escort struggled to match his pace, understanding their king's mood without comprehending its source. The autumn landscape passed unnoticed as worst-case scenarios played through his mind with relentless cruelty. Captain Gareth, his most trusted guard, finally called for rest as their horses began to falter. "Your Majesty, we must allow them to recover, or we'll arrive on foot." 2 minutes, Thorne conceded, though every instinct screamed against delay. "Then we continue." As they watered the exhausted animals, Gareth approached carefully. "Sire, might I ask what drives such urgency?" The assault was reported, but surely local authorities include the man who perpetrated this crime, Thorne interrupted. Sometimes kings must handle justice personally. The captain nodded, though confusion remained clear in his expression. Thorne had always been decisive, but this felt different, personal in ways that transcended typical royal duty. They reached the settlement as sunset painted the sky crimson. The exile community consisted of modest dwellings scattered among ancient oaks, home to nobles whose families had fallen from grace. Usually, these people maintained dignified poverty with quiet resignation. Today, anger and fear charged the air like approaching storms. "The healer's lodge," Thorne commanded, dismounting before his horse had fully stopped. Inside the simple building, his worst fears materialized. Elizabeth lay unconscious on a narrow bed, her face swollen beyond recognition. Bandages covered her arms and torso, evidence of injuries that made his vision blur with rage. But beneath it all, he could still sense the precious life growing within her, weakened but alive. "How long has she been like this?" he asked the attending healer, a woman whose hands shook as she recognized her king. "Since this morning, Your Majesty. The trauma. It's touch and go for both of them." Thorne knelt beside the bed, his fingers gently brushing Elizabeth's uninjured cheek. The bond between them thrummed weakly, confirming what his heart already knew. This was his mate, carrying his child, brutalized by a man who mistook her for a common servant. "Where is Lord Merrin?" The question emerged as barely human sound. "At the inn, my lord, celebrating his successful investigation." Chapter 6. The Choice. The inn reeked of ale and arrogance as Thorne entered, his presence immediately silencing the raucous celebration. Lord Merrin sat at the central table, regaling his men with exaggerated tales of the day's interrogation. The beta's flushed face and slurred speech revealed how thoroughly he'd been drinking. "Your Majesty," Merrin lurched to his feet, swaying slightly. "What brings you to our humble accommodations?" "I was just explaining to the men how we extracted valuable intelligence from a most uncooperative source." "Intelligence," Thorne repeated, each word carrying lethal weight. "Tell me about this source." "A lying wench who claimed ignorance about bandit activities," Merrin sneered. "Thought her pretty face would protect her from proper questioning. I showed her the error of such assumptions." The casual dismissal of Elizabeth's suffering nearly shattered Thorne's control. His hands clenched into fists as alpha rage threatened to overwhelm centuries of royal training. "You beat a pregnant Omega nearly to death," he said quietly. "I disciplined an insolent servant who refused to cooperate with royal investigations," Merrin corrected, missing the dangerous change in Thorne's tone. "If she was truly pregnant, she should have mentioned that before forcing my hand." "Forcing your hand," Thorne repeated, into 34 strikes with a riding crop. Merrin's expression shifted as he realized his king possessed uncomfortably specific information. "Your Majesty, I merely used appropriate methods to—" "Appropriate methods for questioning a pregnant Omega include torture?" "If the circumstances warrant," Merrin began, then stopped. Something in Thorne's voice finally penetrated his alcohol-fogged awareness. "How do you know she was an Omega? And why does her condition concern you so deeply?" The question hung in the air like drawn steel. Thorne faced a crossroads that would define the rest of his reign. He could maintain his secret, pursue quiet justice, and preserve the careful balance that kept his kingdom stable. Or he could reveal the truth and claim what was rightfully his, regardless of political consequences. In the healer's lodge, Elizabeth lay unconscious, their child's life hanging by threads. Merrin sat before him, unrepentant and dangerous. The choice crystallized with perfect clarity. "Because," Thorne said, his voice carrying absolute authority, "she is mine." Chapter 7. The public declaration, the great hall of Ebenvale, had never witnessed such chaos. Word of the king's explosive announcement had spread through the castle like wildfire, drawing every noble, courtier, and servant who could manage an excuse to attend. Thorne stood before his assembled court, having summoned them for what he'd called a matter of royal significance. "Lords and ladies of Ebenvale," he began, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. "Today I reveal a truth that political necessity has long kept hidden. Lady Elizabeth of House Darius is my bonded mate, sealed under a sacred law and blessed by the ancient rites." Gasps echoed through the hall as the implication struck home. An acknowledged mate meant legitimate heirs. Political alliances shifted overnight, and marriage negotiations rendered meaningless. Chancellor Evander rose from his seat, face pale with shock. "Your Majesty, surely this requires careful consideration before public announcement." "The consideration ended when Lord Merrin attacked my mate," Thorne interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. "Lady Elizabeth carries the heir to this throne. Any who threaten her threaten the crown itself." Lord Breton, eldest of the noble houses, stood slowly. "If this bond exists, why the secrecy? Why allow speculation about royal marriages when your mate was already chosen?" "Because some truths invite dangers that love seeks to avoid," Thorne replied. "Political marriages strengthen kingdoms, but bonds of the heart create heirs worth protecting." Today's events proved that silence no longer serves our interests. Murmurs rippled through the assembly as nobles processed how this revelation would affect their own positions. Marriage alliances collapsed, inheritance lines shifted, and the careful balance of court politics tilted dramatically. "What of Lord Merrin?" called Lord Harwick. "What justice awaits one who unknowingly attacked the Queen?" "Unknowingly," Thorne repeated, letting the word hang with ominous weight. "We shall determine exactly what Lord Merrin knew and when he knew it. But first, let there be no doubt about Lady Elizabeth's status. She is queen by right of bond, and our child will inherit this throne by right of birth." High Priestess Nissa approached from the shadows where she'd been listening. The ancient woman's presence commanded respect, even from kings. Her knowledge of bloodline magic deeper than anyone living. "Your Majesty," she said carefully, "perhaps we should discuss the complexities that recent events may have created." Something in her tone suggested knowledge beyond the obvious, mysteries that would soon complicate his already dangerous revelation. Chapter 8. The Beta's Trial. The throne room had been transformed into a court of judgment, with Lord Merrin chained before the obsidian seat that would decide his fate. The Beta Lord's earlier arrogance had evaporated during his night in the dungeons, replaced by the cold understanding that his actions carried consequences he'd never imagined. "Lord Merrin of House Darkwater," Thorne intoned formally, "you stand accused of assault upon a pregnant Omega, specifically Lady Elizabeth, Queen of Ebenvale by right of sacred bond." "How do you answer these charges?" Merrin's face had gone ashen as the full magnitude of his crime became clear. "Your Majesty, I had no knowledge of her identity. She wore simple clothes, gathered herbs like a common servant. If you had known, would that have justified 34 strikes against any pregnant woman?" Thorne's voice carried the deadly calm of barely restrained fury. "Does noble birth determine who deserves protection from brutality?" "No, Your Majesty," Merrin whispered, finally understanding the trap his actions had created. Priestess Nissa stepped forward, her ancient eyes studying the accused with uncomfortable intensity. "Tell us, Lord Merrin, why did your investigation focus so specifically on the exile settlements? What intelligence guided you there?" The question sparked something desperate in Merrin's expression. "I had reports, reliable sources indicating unusual activities. Merchants spoke of strange occurrences, unexplained phenomena. What manner of phenomena? Nissa pressed. Lights in the forest at night, herbs growing out of season, animals behaving oddly. Marin's voice grew stronger as he grasped for any justification. These could indicate magical influences that threaten the kingdom's stability. Thorne exchanged glances with the priestess, noting her sharp attention to these details. Elizabeth's Omega abilities included unusual connections to natural forces, but she'd been careful to hide such gifts from observation. And your solution to these mysterious phenomena was to beat information from pregnant women? Thorne asked. I sought to identify the source. You sought to torture answers from someone you believed powerless to resist, Thorne corrected. The fact that your victim happened to be my queen merely compounds the crime you would have committed against any woman. Chancellor Evand cleared his throat nervously. Your Majesty, while Lord Marin's methods were clearly excessive, perhaps exile rather than execution would send what message? Thorne interrupted. That queens can be brutalized with impunity, that pregnant Omegas deserve less protection than other subjects. The assembled court watched in tense silence as their king's judgment took shape. Lord Marin of House Darkwater, I sentence you to death for assault upon the queen and endangerment of the royal heir. But before the sentence could be carried out, Priestess Nissa spoke again. Your Majesty, there are complications that require discussion before justice proceeds. Chapter 9. The Execution and its Aftermath. Dawn broke gray and cold over the castle courtyard where justice would be served. Lord Marin knelt on the execution block, his earlier defiance replaced by grim acceptance of his fate. The assembled crowd included nobles who'd supported his harsh methods and commoners who'd suffered under his authority. Thorne stood before the condemned man, the great sword of royal justice heavy in his hands. Lord Marin of House Darkwater, do you have final words before the sentence is carried out? Only this, Your Majesty, Marin replied, his voice carrying further than expected. I served what I believed were the kingdom's interests. If my methods were wrong, history will judge whether the threats I sought to prevent were real. The cryptic statement puzzled observers, but Thorne had no patience for riddles. With a single, clean stroke, he ended Marin's life and the immediate threat to his family's safety. As the crowd dispersed, Priestess Nissa approached with obvious urgency. Your Majesty, we must speak privately. Lord Marin's death may have solved one problem while creating others far more dangerous. They retreated to the king's private study, where ancient texts and modern reports cluttered every surface. Nissa moved among them with familiarity that suggested previous research. What complications trouble you, priestess? Thorne asked. Lord Marin's interest in your mate wasn't random, she began carefully. My investigations reveal he'd been tracking unusual magical signatures in the exile settlements for months. Lady Elizabeth's Omega abilities, enhanced by pregnancy, would have created exactly the phenomena he described. You're saying he targeted her specifically. I'm saying he may have been drawn to her without understanding why. But more troubling are these. Nissa produced a collection of ancient parchments, covered in symbols that seemed to shift in the candlelight. Ritual texts from the Forbidden Archives. Someone has been researching bloodline magic, specifically ways to sever or corrupt mating bonds. The implications struck Thorne like physical blows. Are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that Lord Marin's actions may have been part of a larger conspiracy. One that didn't end with his death. Nissa's expression grew even more grave. These rituals require specific components: violence against the bonded pair, blood spilled during gestation, and proximity during vulnerable moments. The attack, Thorne breathed. It wasn't random brutality. It was part of a ritual. More than that, Your Majesty, if these texts are accurate, the ritual may have partially succeeded. Your child now carries complications that could affect the entire bloodline. Outside, celebration continued as the kingdom rejoiced in their queen's protection. But in the study, the king and priestess confronted the possibility that Marin's death had come too late to prevent deeper damage. Chapter 10. The Priestess's Revelation. High Priestess Nissa spread the ancient text across Thorne's desk, with hands that trembled slightly. The first sign of uncertainty he'd ever witnessed from her. The parchments seemed to whisper secrets in the candlelight, their forbidden knowledge demanding careful interpretation. The ritual is called the Sundering of Lines, she explained. her voice heavy with dread. Designed by ancient enemies of the Alpha bloodlines to corrupt rather than destroy. A weapon that turned strength into weakness across generations. Thorne studied the incomprehensible symbols with growing horror. Explain it in terms I can understand. When an Alpha mates with an Omega, their bond creates a pure bloodline, children who inherit the best of both natures. This ritual corrupts that purity by introducing a third essence during the most vulnerable moment. Nissa pointed to illustrations that made his stomach turn. Violence during pregnancy, blood spilled in anger, fear, and pain experienced by the bonded pair. Marin provided all of these elements, Thorne realized. Unknowingly, perhaps, but effectively. The ritual requires no conscious participation from its catalyst, only the right actions at the right time. Nissa's expression grew even darker. But the true horror lies in the corruption's nature. It doesn't destroy the child, it marks them. Marked how? With the essence of whoever spilled the blood. Lord Marin's beta nature is now intertwined with your heir's alpha inheritance. The child will possess abilities from both bloodlines, but the combination may prove unstable. The words hit Thorne like physical blows. Their child, conceived in love and carried with hope, had been unwittingly corrupted by an enemy's violence. The pure alpha heir he'd dreamed of would instead bear the mark of the man who'd nearly killed its mother. Can this corruption be reversed? He asked desperately. I don't know, Nissa admitted. The texts describe the process but offer no remedies. Such rituals were banned precisely because their effects prove permanent. Then we deal with whatever consequences arise, Thorne declared, though uncertainty colored his words. Our child will be loved regardless of bloodline complications. Your Majesty, Nissa said carefully. There's more. These texts were found in Lord Marin's personal chambers. He may not have performed the ritual consciously, but someone guided him toward it. Someone who understood exactly what his actions would accomplish. The revelation opened horrifying possibilities. If Marin had been manipulated into performing an ancient ritual, then their enemy remained hidden, watching to see what corruption they'd successfully planted in the royal bloodline. Find them, Thorne commanded. Whoever orchestrated this will answer for their crimes. Chapter 11. The Midpoint Shift. The Dual Heritage. 3 days later, as Elizabeth slowly recovered from her injuries, the first signs of the ritual's effects became undeniable. Thorne knelt beside her bed, holding her hand while she described sensations that defied normal understanding. The child moves differently now, she whispered, her voice still weak from trauma. Before the attack, I felt pure alpha strength, powerful but controlled. Now there's something else, wild energy that shifts between protection and destruction. Nissa believes the baby carries both alpha and beta essences, Thorne explained gently. Marin's violence during the ritual somehow marked our child with his bloodline. Elizabeth's violet eyes filled with tears she tried to hide. What kind of future can we offer a child caught between two natures? How will the kingdom accept an heir of mixed blood? The same way they accepted you as queen. Because I command it, Thorne replied fiercely. Our child's parentage is not subject to noble approval. But even as he spoke the words, he knew political reality would prove more complex. The great houses had grudgingly accepted his revelation about their bond. But a corrupted heir represented a different challenge entirely. Whispers already circulated about the child's tainted nature, and several noble families had begun making discreet inquiries about succession laws. Elizabeth struggled to sit up, her healer's instincts overriding personal discomfort. There's something else, Thorne. Dreams have been coming, visions of the child's potential futures. Some show great power used for good. Others, she shuddered. Others show destruction that consumes everything we've built. Dreams shaped by trauma, he suggested hopefully. Your injuries affect more than just your body. Perhaps, but Omega's sight strengthens during pregnancy, and corruption like this creates unpredictable, magical resonances. Her hand moved protectively to her stomach. What if we birth something the kingdom cannot survive? The question haunted both their thoughts as outside their chamber, the first delegation of concerned nobles requested an audience. Word of the child's dual heritage had spread despite efforts at secrecy, and political pressures were building toward decisions that could fragment the kingdom. Lord Breton's voice carried through the hallway. The king must address these concerns before they destabilize the realm. Chancellor Evanda's reply was equally audible. His Majesty will receive petitions when the Queen's health permits. The Queen's health is precisely what concerns us, came another voice. If this child poses dangers, waiting only increases the risk. Chapter 12. The Kingdom Divides. The Great Hall erupted in arguments that threatened to become violence as the noble houses split into factions. Thorne watched from his throne as decades of careful political balance collapsed under the weight of his revelations. The child hadn't even been born, yet already it divided his kingdom more effectively than any enemy army. "The bloodline is corrupted," shouted Lord Harwick, his face red with passion. "No good can come from mixing alpha purity with beta contamination." "Contamination?" Lord Gareth rose from his seat, hand on sword hilt. "You speak of His Majesty's heir, the future of our kingdom." "I speak of an abomination that threatens everything our ancestors built," Harwick shot back. "Alpha blood has ruled for 3 centuries because it's pure. This mongrel destroys that heritage." Thorne's roar silenced the hall instantly. "The next man who calls my child an abomination will learn how quickly pure alpha blood can spill." The threat sobered the immediate arguments, but underlying tensions remained visible in every exchange of glances. Families who'd served together for generations now eyed each other with suspicion, each wondering where loyalty would fall when choices became unavoidable. Chancellor Evander approached the throne carefully. "Your Majesty, perhaps if the Queen were to appear before the court, address these concerns directly." "The Queen recovers from injuries inflicted by a man who shared these lords' attitudes," Thorne interrupted coldly. "She will not subject herself to further abuse disguised as political necessity." "Then perhaps your Majesty might consider other options," suggested Lord Brennan, his tone deceptively reasonable. "The kingdom requires stability above all else. If this child's nature proves problematic, other arrangements could be made." "Other arrangements," Thorne repeated, each word carrying lethal weight. "Explain exactly what you mean by that." The hall fell silent as nobles realized they'd pushed their king to a dangerous edge. Brennan's face went pale, but political necessity forced him to continue. "The succession laws provide flexibility in cases of unusual circumstances. A regency could be established, or the crown could pass to more stable bloodlines." "You suggest I disinherit my own child before it's even born?" "I suggest your Majesty consider all options for the kingdom's welfare," Brennan replied, though sweat beaded his forehead. "Personal feelings cannot override dynastic responsibilities." The argument was interrupted by commotion near the hall's entrance. A messenger burst through the doors, his clothes torn and face streaked with dirt. "Your Majesty," he gasped, "the northern border. Lord Darius leads an army toward the capital." Chapter 13. The Protected Sanctuary. Within hours of the messenger's arrival, Ebonvale Castle transformed into a fortress, preparing for siege. Thorne commanded the preparations from the central courtyard, his mind divided between immediate military needs and protecting Elizabeth from the approaching chaos. "How large a force?" he demanded as Captain Gareth reported troop movements. 15,000 at minimum, Your Majesty. Lord Darius has gathered exiled houses and foreign mercenaries under banners of legitimate succession." Gareth's expression was grim. "They'll reach our walls within 3 days." Thorne absorbed the numbers with cold calculation, his own forces numbered nearly equal. But defending while protecting a pregnant queen would limit tactical options significantly. "Move Lady Elizabeth to the inner keep," he commanded. "Post my personal guard at her door. No one enters without my direct presence." "Your Majesty," Chancellor Evander protested. Surely the queen could be moved to safety in the countryside, where Darius's scouts could capture her more easily? Thorne's voice carried dangerous undertones. "She stays where I can protect her personally." As servants rushed to relocate Elizabeth's chambers, Priestess Nisa approached with news that complicated an already desperate situation. "The magical manifestations are intensifying," she reported quietly. "The corruption in the child's bloodline responds to its mother's stress. We've had reports of spontaneous fires, animals fleeing the castle grounds, and weather patterns that defy natural explanation." "Meaning?" meaning the child's dual nature creates unpredictable magical releases. If Lady Elizabeth experiences significant trauma, such as siege conditions, the effects could endanger everyone within these walls. Thorne stared at the approaching dust clouds on the horizon, understanding that he faced enemies on multiple fronts. External armies threatened his crown, internal nobles questioned his heir's legitimacy, and magical forces beyond anyone's control grew stronger with each passing hour. Double the guard around the Queen's chambers, he decided, and position our most experienced mages nearby. If these manifestations become dangerous, they'll need to contain them. Your Majesty, Gareth said carefully, the men are asking about the succession. If something happens to you during the siege, nothing will happen to me, Thorne replied with absolute conviction. I didn't survive this long to die before my child draws its first breath. But as evening fell and enemy campfires dotted the landscape like malevolent stars, even his legendary confidence felt strained by forces gathering against them. Chapter 14: The Ancient Powers Stir. The first magical incident occurred at midnight, as Elizabeth slept fitfully in her heavily guarded chambers. The temperature in the inner keep dropped suddenly, breath misting in the air while frost spread across stone walls, despite the autumn warmth outside. Guards reported that their weapons hummed with unexplained energy, and several horses in the stables became violently agitated. Thorne rushed to Elizabeth's side, finding her caught in the grip of nightmares that seemed to affect reality around her. Her skin glowed with faint silver light, while shadows moved independently of their sources, creating an atmosphere of otherworldly menace. Elizabeth, he called softly, touching her shoulder. Wake up, beloved. Her eyes snapped open, revealing pupils dilated beyond normal limits. For a moment, she seemed not to recognize him, and the magical phenomena intensified dramatically. Windows rattled in their frames, and the very stones beneath their feet vibrated with harmonics that suggested immense power building toward release. Thorne, she whispered, and gradually the supernatural effects began to subside. I was dreaming of the child. It was trying to protect us, but its power, it's too much for one so small to control. Priestess Nissa arrived breathless, having sensed the magical disturbance from her tower chambers. The corruption grows stronger as birth approaches, she explained urgently. The child's dual nature creates conflicting energies that seek release through its mother. Can you contain it? Thorne asked. I can try, but containment isn't the real solution. This power needs direction, not suppression. Without proper guidance, it will continue building until it finds release, possibly destructive release. Outside, shouts arose from the battlements. Enemy siege engines had appeared during the night, and Lord Darius's army was positioning for assault. The corruption in their unborn child had chosen the worst possible moment to manifest uncontrollably. How long until the baby comes? Thorne asked. Perhaps 2 weeks, Elizabeth replied weakly. But the magical pressure, it's forcing early development. The child may not wait that long. A tremendous crash echoed through the castle as the first catapult stones struck the outer walls. The siege had begun, and with it, a race between external enemies and internal magical forces that could destroy them all. Nissa, Thorne commanded, do whatever you must to stabilize these manifestations. I won't lose my family to forces we can't control. I'll try, Your Majesty, the priestess replied grimly, but you may need to accept that some powers exceed even royal command. Chapter 15. The Final Choice. 3 days into the siege, Lord Darius's herald approached under a flag of truce. The enemy leader's terms were delivered with the certainty of a man who believed victory was inevitable. Surrender the corrupted queen and renounce your bastard heir, the herald proclaimed from the walls. Accept a proper marriage alliance and produce legitimate children. Do this, and Lord Darius will spare your throne and your life. Thorne stood atop the battlements, his response carrying across both armies. Tell Lord Darius that kings don't negotiate with traitors. If he wants my crown, he's welcome to try taking it. As the herald departed, Chancellor Ivanda approached with several nobles, whose faces showed the strain of prolonged siege. Your Majesty, perhaps we should consider their offer, the kingdom's survival. The kingdom's survival depends on strong leadership, not cowardly compromise, Thorne interrupted. I won't abandon my family to appease enemies or fearful allies. But the magical incidents, Lord Breton protested. They're getting worse. Yesterday's manifestation shattered every window in the East Wing. What happens when the child is actually born? The question haunted everyone present. Each magical release grew stronger, and Elizabeth's condition worsened under the combined stress of pregnancy complications and siege conditions. The castle's mages worked constantly to contain manifestations that threatened to tear the ancient stones apart. We face that challenge when it comes, Thorne decided. But we face it together as a kingdom united rather than divided by fear. That evening, as enemy forces prepared for a major assault, Thorne sat beside Elizabeth's bed, watching her sleep. The magical aura around her had become visible even to non-mages, silver light pulsing in rhythm with their child's heartbeat. "I know you're awake," she said softly, opening eyes that seemed to hold depths of power beyond mortal understanding. "You're worried about the choice you'll have to make." "What choice?" "Between saving the kingdom and saving us. When the moment comes, and it's coming soon, you'll have to decide what matters more." "There is no choice," Thorne replied fiercely. "I won't sacrifice my family for political convenience, even if refusing costs thousands of lives, even if our child's power destroys everything we've built." Her hand found his, squeezing with surprising strength. "Promise me something, Thorne. When the time comes, choose what's right for the most people. Don't let love blind you to duty." Before he could respond, horns sounded the alarm. Darius's forces were beginning their final assault, and magical energy built to levels that made the air itself dangerous to breathe. Chapter 16. The Invasion Begins. Dawn brought a coordinated assault that tested every defense Thorne had prepared. Enemy forces struck the main gate, while aerial attacks targeted the inner walls, forcing his defenders to fight on multiple fronts simultaneously. From the highest tower, he coordinated resistance, while remaining close enough to protect Elizabeth from both external threats and magical manifestations. "The north wall is weakening," Captain Gareth reported breathlessly. "Their siege engines are more advanced than we anticipated. We need to reinforce or they'll breach within hours." "Pull forces from the eastern approaches," Thorne commanded. Darius committed his main strength to the frontal assault. He won't have reserves for multiple breakthrough attempts. But even as he spoke the words, another magical incident erupted in the inner keep. This time, Elizabeth's distress caused every metal object in the castle to resonate with harmonic frequencies that threatened structural integrity. Swords sang with otherworldly music, armor plates vibrated loose from their bindings, and the great iron gates screamed as dimensional forces pulled them in impossible directions. "The mages can't contain it," Priestess Nisa called over the supernatural cacophony. "The child's power is responding to external threats. It's trying to protect its mother through instinctive magical defenses." "Then direct it," Thorne shouted back. "Use that power against our enemies." "I can't. The corruption makes it unpredictable. We might destroy ourselves along with them." Through the chaos, enemy soldiers poured through a breach in the outer wall. Thorne found himself fighting a two-front war against human enemies who sought his throne and magical forces that could obliterate friend and foe alike. "Fall back to the inner keep," he commanded. Though retreat felt like abandoning everything his ancestors had built, "We make our stand where the queen can be protected." As his forces regrouped around the central stronghold, Thorne caught sight of Lord Darius himself leading the assault. The rebel lord's face showed fanatic determination as he pressed forward, seemingly unaware of the magical chaos surrounding him. "You cannot win, Thorne," Darius called across the courtyard. "Your corrupted bloodline ends today." The taunt triggered another massive magical manifestation as Elizabeth, despite her weakened condition, responded to the threat against her family. This time, the power found focus. Enemy soldiers suddenly found their weapons too hot to hold, their armor crushing inward, their very blood beginning to boil. "Now you've made her angry," Thorne said, with grim satisfaction as Darius's assault faltered before forces beyond military understanding. Chapter 17. The Birth in Blood. The final battle raged through the inner courtyard as magical forces and military tactics created chaos beyond anything recorded in the kingdom's history. Thorne fought with desperate efficiency, protecting the route to Elizabeth's chambers, while his child's uncontrolled power turned the siege into supernatural warfare. The Queen! A servant's scream cut through the combat noise. The baby comes! Thorne abandoned the fighting to reach Elizabeth's side. Finding her gripped by labor pains intensified by magical energies that made the very air dangerous to breathe, Priestess Nissa worked frantically to create protective barriers around the birthing chamber, but the child's emergence was triggering manifestations beyond anyone's ability to control. "Hold on," Thorne urged, taking Elizabeth's hand despite the electrical discharge that passed between them. "Just hold on." "The child won't wait," she gasped through contractions that seemed to tear reality itself. "It's coming now, whether we're ready or not." Outside, the battle had devolved into chaos as magical phenomena affected both armies equally. Soldiers found themselves fighting enemies who appeared and disappeared at random, weapons that changed shape in their hands, and terrain that shifted beneath their feet. The moment of birth arrived with a sound like thunder. The child emerged in a flash of silver and gold light that illuminated the entire castle, its first cry carrying harmonics that shattered every piece of glass within a mile radius. But instead of the monstrous corruption everyone feared, the baby appeared perfect, impossibly beautiful, with eyes that held depths of ancient wisdom. "A boy," Nissa announced in wonder. "The heir lives, and his power." The magical manifestations suddenly ceased, as if a switch had been thrown. The chaotic energies that had terrorized the castle focused instantly on the newborn child, creating a protective aura that surrounded him like armor made of pure light. "He's controlling it," Elizabeth whispered in amazement. "The corruption isn't destroying him, he's mastering it." Through the windows, they could see the effect on the battle below. Enemy forces stood frozen in place, held motionless by power that emanated from the infant prince. Lord Darius himself knelt in the courtyard, his face showing religious awe as he comprehended forces beyond mortal understanding. The dual heritage, Nissa breathed. It wasn't corruption after all, it was evolution. In Thorne's arms, his son opened eyes that held both alpha fire and beta wisdom, unified in a way that created something entirely new. The prophesied destruction had become unprecedented strength, and the child they'd feared would destroy the kingdom might instead transform it into something greater than anyone had imagined. Chapter 18. The Dark Night of the Soul Hours. After the birth, as an uneasy calm settled over the battlefield, Thorne stood alone on the battlements facing the most profound crisis of his reign. Below, thousands of enemy soldiers remained frozen by his son's power, neither dead nor truly alive. Darius knelt motionless in the courtyard, his rebellion ended not by defeat, but by supernatural intervention beyond his comprehension. "What have we created?" Thorne whispered to the wind, his voice carrying all the weight of a father's fears. The power their child wielded exceeded anything in recorded history. The boy could end battles with a thought, hold armies motionless with his will, and bend reality itself to his desires. But such abilities in the hands of an infant raised questions that had no comfortable answers. "He sleeps now," Elizabeth said softly, approaching despite her recent ordeal. "Nissa says the manifestations will continue but remain controlled as long as he's not distressed." "Controlled," Thorne repeated hollowly. "A baby shouldn't need to control forces that could destroy kingdoms. What kind of life will he have? What kind of king will he become?" "A king who understands both strength and wisdom," she replied, though uncertainty colored her words. The dual bloodlines didn't corrupt him, they balanced him. Alpha power tempered by beta restraint. "Or alpha ambition amplified by beta cunning," Thorne countered. "We've brought something into the world that our enemies will either worship or seek to destroy. There can be no middle ground with power like this." Elizabeth moved to stand beside him, her presence a comfort even amid his darkest doubts. "Do you regret it? The bond, the child, the choices that brought us here?" The question cut deeper than any sword stroke. Looking out over a kingdom forever changed by their son's birth, Thorne confronted truths he'd been avoiding since the siege began. "I regret the pain you suffered. I regret the deaths required to protect our secret. I regret that our child will never know a normal life." He paused, gathering courage for the deepest admission. "But I don't regret loving you. Even if it cost me everything else, it won't," she said firmly. "Our son's power came from love, not corruption. Whatever challenges we face, we'll face them together. As if summoned by his parents' conversation, a gentle cry echoed from the royal chambers, not the earth-shaking wail of his birth, but the normal sound of an infant seeking comfort. Thorne and Elizabeth hurried inside to find their son awake, his eyes reflecting candlelight with entirely human warmth. For a moment, he was simply their child, perfect, innocent, and vulnerable in the way all newborns were. The awesome power lay dormant, waiting for need or threat to awaken it again. "What shall we name him?" Elizabeth asked. "Kieran," Thorne decided. "It means little king in the old tongue. Let him grow into power rather than being consumed by it." Chapter 19. The Child's Power. 3 days after Prince Kieran's birth, the supernatural phenomena that had paralyzed 2 armies began to shift in focus in ways that revealed the true scope of the child's abilities. Rather than random manifestations of chaotic power, the effects started displaying deliberate intelligence that responded to the needs of those around him. "Remarkable," Priestess Nissa observed as she documented the latest incident. "When Captain Gareth suffered that sword wound yesterday, the prince somehow accelerated his healing. The cut that should have taken weeks to mend closed overnight." Thorne watched his son sleep peacefully in the royal cradle, finding it difficult to reconcile this innocent infant with the force that had ended a civil war through sheer presence. How is such control possible in someone so young? "The dual heritage creates natural balance," Nissa explained. "Alpha instincts provide the power, while beta wisdom guides its application. He's not consciously directing these effects. They arise from his innate desire to protect and heal those he loves." "And the enemy forces?" "Still held in stasis, but their condition has stabilized. Rather than being trapped in torment, they appear to be experiencing something closer to peaceful sleep. Several have been heard murmuring prayers in their native tongues. The implications were staggering. Rather than becoming the weapon of destruction everyone feared, Kieran seemed to function as a force for healing and protection. His power responded to genuine need, while remaining dormant in the face of mere convenience. "There are requests," Elizabeth said carefully as she joined them in the nursery. "Delegations from every neighboring kingdom want to witness the child who stopped a war. They're calling him everything from blessed peacemaker to herald of a new age." Thorne's expression darkened. "They want to see if he can be controlled or corrupted for their purposes. Perhaps, but some seem genuinely interested in peace. Lord Darius himself has requested an audience, not as a prisoner, but as someone seeking understanding." The idea of meeting with the man who'd led a rebellion against his throne felt surreal, but the new reality required new approaches to diplomacy. If Kieran's power could inspire former enemies to seek dialogue rather than conflict, perhaps there were possibilities no one had previously imagined. "Arrange the meeting," Thorne decided, "but under heavy guard and with clear limits. We'll discover what our son's gift has revealed to our former enemies." As if responding to his father's voice, Kieran stirred slightly, and for a moment every flower in the castle gardens bloomed simultaneously, a gentle reminder that power wielded with love created beauty rather than destruction. Chapter 20. The Alliance of Love. The Great Hall had been transformed for a meeting unlike any in the kingdom's history. Lord Darius knelt before the throne, but his posture suggested reverence rather than defeat. Around him, former enemy commanders waited with expressions of wonder rather than resentment. "Your Majesty," Darius began, his voice carrying a humility that seemed genuine, "I came here seeking to prevent what I believed would be a corrupted succession. Instead, I witnessed the birth of something sacred." "Sacred," Thorne repeated carefully. "An interesting perspective from someone who recently laid siege to my castle." "The siege ended the moment your son drew breath," Darius replied. "What I felt in that moment, it wasn't fear or defeat. It was recognition. This child represents everything our kingdoms have needed: power balanced by wisdom, strength tempered by compassion." Elizabeth sat beside Thorne's throne, Kieran sleeping peacefully in her arms. The infant's presence seemed to affect everyone in the hall, creating an atmosphere of calm that made honest conversation possible. "What do you propose?" Thorne asked. "Alliance based on shared purpose, rather than conquered territory," Darius answered. "Your son's gift extends beyond individual healing. He can help entire kingdoms find balance. But such power requires protection and guidance. Priestess Nisa stepped forward with scrolls containing reports from across the realm. The manifestations continue throughout the kingdom, Your Majesty. Diseased crops are healing, poisoned wells are purifying, and old wounds, both physical and political, are beginning to mend. At what cost? Thorne demanded. Such power must require some form of payment. Only love, Elizabeth said softly. The effects are strongest in communities where people care for each other, weakest where hatred and division rule. It's as if Kieran's gift responds to the emotional health of those around him. The revelation reshaped everything they'd believed about power and its consequences. Rather than demanding sacrifice, their son's abilities seemed to reward compassion and punish cruelty through their very operation. Then we have a choice, Darius said. Build a kingdom worthy of such gifts, or watch them fade in the face of our smaller ambitions. Through the hall's tall windows, sunlight streamed with unusual warmth for the season. Outside, reports continued arriving of miraculous healings, reconciled enemies, and hope returning to communities that had known only despair for years. Draft new alliance terms, Thorne commanded. Not conquest or submission, but cooperation based on shared values. If our son's power can unite kingdoms through love, then love will be our guiding principle. Chapter 21. The Charge of Kings. 6 months after Prince Kieran's birth, the transformed kingdom faced its first external test as raiders from the hostile northern wastes threatened the border settlements. Unlike previous conflicts, this battle would be fought by armies united not through fear, but through shared purpose. Thorne rode at the head of forces that included former enemies, now serving as allies, their banners flying side by side in unprecedented cooperation. Lord Darius commanded the eastern flank, his tactical expertise serving the crown he'd once sought to overthrow. Remember, Thorne addressed his commanders before the engagement. We fight to protect, not to conquer. Show these raiders what united kingdoms can accomplish. The battle itself proved unlike any in recorded history. Rather than the brutal clash of traditional warfare, Thorne's forces moved with coordination that bordered on supernatural. Soldiers found themselves anticipating their comrades' needs. Healers appeared exactly where and when required, and weapons struck with precision that minimized casualties, even among their enemies. The prince's influence extends this far, Captain Gareth asked in wonder, as their cavalry executed maneuvers of impossible complexity without prior rehearsal. Love creates connections that transcend individual understanding, Thorne replied, feeling the truth of those words in his own enhanced awareness of his men's conditions and needs. The northern raiders, accustomed to facing divided kingdoms weakened by internal conflicts, found themselves confronting something entirely new. As the battle progressed, many simply laid down their weapons, rather than continue fighting forces that seemed blessed by divine purpose. We surrender, their leader called across the battlefield. We came seeking easy plunder from weakened lands. Instead, we find a kingdom that fights like it's defending paradise itself. The comparison wasn't entirely inaccurate. Under Kieran's influence, the realm had indeed become something approaching paradise, not through elimination of conflict, but through transformation of its nature. Disputes were resolved through dialogue, enemies were converted to allies, and the very concept of warfare was evolving toward protection rather than conquest. Escort them to the border, Thorne commanded, with food and supplies for their journey home. Let them carry word that this kingdom offers friendship to those who approach with peaceful intent. As victory celebrations began, Thorne reflected on how completely their world had changed. Power still mattered, but it served love rather than ruling through fear. Their son hadn't eliminated conflict. He'd transformed it into an opportunity for growth and connection. The Charge of Kings had become a march towards something unprecedented in human history. Chapter 22. Victory through Unity. The final confrontation came not as a battle, but as a moment of recognition that changed the very nature of warfare. As Thorne's united armies faced the remaining northern raiders, Prince Kieran's influence reached its full manifestation, not through overwhelming force, but through an irresistible call to the better nature of every soul present. The enemy leader, a grizzled warrior named Hrothgar, who'd spent decades raiding peaceful settlements, found himself weeping as he felt the child's power touch his heart. Around him, hardened fighters laid down weapons, not from defeat, but from sudden understanding of what they'd been fighting against. "This is no mortal child," Hrothgar declared, his voice carrying across both armies. "This is a gift from the gods themselves, a chance for all of us to become something better than we've been." Thorne rode forward, his son cradled in one arm while the other hand rested on his sword hilt. Not as a threat, but as a reminder that peace was protected by strength when necessary. "Prince Kieran offers transformation to any who choose it," he announced. "But the choice must be genuine. His power amplifies what already exists in your hearts: compassion for those who possess it, emptiness for those who've abandoned such feelings entirely." The test was immediate and undeniable. Warriors who'd retained some shred of honor despite their harsh lives found themselves filled with purpose and belonging. Others, who'd embraced cruelty as a way of life, simply faded, not killed or harmed, but becoming insubstantial until they chose to leave or embrace change. "I've spent 40 years taking what others built," Hrothgar said, approaching close enough to see Kieran's impossibly wise eyes. "Let me spend whatever time remains building something worth protecting." The surrender that followed became a celebration as former enemies shared food, stories, and hopes for futures none had previously dared imagine. The northern raiders didn't retreat. They settled, becoming the first foreign citizens of a kingdom that was rapidly transcending traditional boundaries. "How far will this spread?" Elizabeth asked as they watched former enemies teaching their children to play together. "As far as love reaches," Thorne replied, "which apparently has no limits." Priestess Nissa approached with reports from distant kingdoms where rumors of the miracle child were inspiring similar transformations, not through conquest or conversion, but through the simple example of what became possible when power served love rather than ambition. "The world is changing," she observed, "not just our kingdom, but everywhere Prince Kieran's influence touches." "Then we'd better ensure he grows up worthy of such responsibility," Thorne decided. Though watching his son's peaceful sleep, he suspected that worthiness was already assured. Chapter 23: The New Order. 2 years after the transformative battle, King Thorne surveyed a realm that bore little resemblance to the kingdom he'd inherited. The throne room bustled with representatives from dozens of former enemy nations, all seeking to understand how the kingdom of Ebonvale had achieved such unprecedented prosperity and peace. Prince Kieran, now a precocious toddler, moved freely among the assembled dignitaries, his innocent curiosity touching hearts that had been hardened by decades of political cynicism. His presence continued to inspire miraculous changes, not through conscious effort, but through the simple purity of a child who knew only love and acceptance. "The trade agreements alone have tripled our kingdom's wealth," Chancellor Evand reported with amazement that still colored his voice after months of impossible prosperity. When people can trust each other completely, negotiations become cooperative rather than adversarial. "And the military applications?" Thorne asked. "Revolutionary," Captain Gareth replied. "United forces fight with coordination that makes small armies devastatingly effective. We've been able to reduce our standing forces by half while increasing our defensive capabilities tenfold." But the most significant changes were social rather than economic or military. Crime had virtually disappeared as Kieran's influence made cruelty feel literally painful to those who attempted it. Disputes were resolved through empathy rather than law, and the very concept of punishment had evolved toward healing and restoration. "How do we govern a kingdom that barely needs governing?" Thorne wondered aloud. "By ensuring the conditions that make such harmony possible," Elizabeth replied, entering with Kieran balanced on her hip. "Our son's gift isn't magic that solves all problems. It's inspiration that helps people solve problems themselves." The distinction was crucial. Rather than creating dependency on supernatural intervention, Kieran's influence encouraged the development of natural human virtues. Communities learned to care for their members, individuals discovered their capacity for selflessness, and conflicts became opportunities for deeper understanding. "What concerns me," Priestess Nissa added, "are the reports from distant kingdoms where people attempt to replicate these effects artificially. Rituals designed to create similar powers in their own children, political movements claiming divine mandate for conquest. Jealousy was inevitable, Thorne acknowledged. The question is whether we can help them understand that love can't be conquered or copied, only freely given and received. As if responding to his father's words, Kieran laughed delightedly at something he'd discovered in the throne room's shadows, his joy echoing through the chamber with harmonics that made everyone present feel lighter and happier. Chapter 24. The family complete 5 years had passed since the birth that changed the world, and the royal family had settled into rhythms that would have seemed impossible before Kieran's transformative influence. The prince, now a vibrant 5-year-old, displayed intelligence that impressed scholars twice his age, while maintaining the innocent wonder that made his power so purely beneficial. "Papa, why do some people try to hurt others?" Kieran asked during one of their evening walks through gardens that bloomed with supernatural abundance. "When I touch their hearts, they feel better, but they have to choose to let me." Thorne knelt to meet his son's eyes, seeing wisdom there that humbled him daily. "Sometimes people are scared or sad, and they forget how to feel love. Your gift reminds them, but you're right, they have to choose to remember." "Will I always be able to help them?" "As long as your heart stays pure," Elizabeth answered, joining them beneath stars that seemed to shine more brightly over their transformed kingdom. "But that's something you'll have to choose every day, just like everyone else." The question reflected concerns that had grown with Kieran's age and awareness. His power remained stable and beneficial, but the child was beginning to understand the responsibility that came with abilities beyond mortal comprehension. "I want to help everyone," he declared, with the passionate certainty of childhood. "Make all the kingdoms happy like ours." "Wanting to help is beautiful," Thorne said carefully. "But forcing help on people who don't want it can become a kind of harm. True love respects others' freedom to choose their own paths." The lessons were crucial as delegations continued arriving from across the known world, seeking everything from healing miracles to political advantage. Some approached with genuine desire for peace and prosperity, others with schemes to use Kieran's abilities for conquest or control. "He's learning to sense the difference," Nissa observed during one of their regular consultations. "Children who've been raised in love develop natural wisdom about others' motivations." Indeed, Kieran had begun showing preferences for visitors who came with pure intentions while becoming shy around those who harbored hidden agendas. His power responded accordingly, blessing sincere seekers with healing and inspiration while remaining dormant in the presence of those who sought to exploit it. "The balance holds," Thorne reflected with satisfaction that bordered on wonder. "Love continues to create more love, wisdom guides power, and our kingdom grows stronger through service to others rather than domination over them." As they returned to the castle, Kieran fell asleep in his father's arms, his peaceful breathing maintaining the gentle harmonics that had become the kingdom's signature sound. A lullaby that promised tomorrow would bring new opportunities for growth, connection, and joy. Chapter 25. The Crown Reborn. 10 years after Prince Kieran's birth, King Thorne stood once again on the battlements where he'd once contemplated the price of love. Now, however, the view revealed a world transformed beyond his wildest dreams. Cities sparkled with prosperity in every direction. Trade routes bustled with peaceful commerce, and the very air seemed to shimmer with contentment that touched every living thing. "The delegation from the Eastern Kingdoms has arrived," Queen Elizabeth announced, her title now officially recognized by every nation on the continent. "They're the last holdouts requesting formal alliance, rather than simply accepting our influence through proximity." Kieran, now 10 years old and displaying both the noble bearing of his father and the gentle wisdom of his mother, listened to their discussion with the serious attention he'd always brought to matters of statecraft. His dual heritage had indeed created something unprecedented, not the corruption everyone had feared, but a perfect balance between alpha strength and beta wisdom. "Do they seek alliance or absorption?" he asked, his young voice carrying undertones of power that made experienced diplomats nervous. "Alliance," Thorne confirmed proudly. "They've learned what every other kingdom has discovered. Your influence grows stronger through voluntary cooperation than through any form of coercion." The transformation had indeed spread far beyond their borders, carried by traders, scholars, and refugees who'd experienced life in a realm where love truly conquered all. Other rulers had initially attempted military responses, then economic pressure, then desperate magical research, all failing because Kieran's gift couldn't be fought, bought, or copied. I want to meet them, the prince decided, not as a tool for negotiation, but as someone who might become their friend. As you wish, Elizabeth agreed, though she exchanged glances with her husband. Kieran's power continued growing with his age and understanding, and they sometimes worried about the burdens such abilities would place on his young shoulders. That evening, as the royal family prepared for the formal reception, Thorne reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The secret bond that had nearly destroyed them had instead become the foundation for transforming the world. Love had indeed proven stronger than fear, though the path had required sacrifices and courage he'd never imagined possessing. No regrets? Elizabeth asked, echoing the question she'd posed during their darkest hours. Only that it took so long to understand what truly mattered, Thorne replied, watching Kieran practice his diplomatic etiquette with endearing seriousness. We spent years hiding love when we should have been celebrating it as the force that makes everything else worthwhile. And now? Now we help others discover the same truth, one alliance at a time. As the reception began and former enemies gathered to celebrate bonds stronger than any political treaty, Prince Kieran moved among them with the natural grace of someone born to unite rather than divide. His laughter echoed through halls that had once known only the hollow sounds of power without purpose, creating music that promised even greater harmony in the years to come. True power serves love, not the reverse, and the greatest magic of all is the courage to choose connection over conquest, understanding over dominance, and hope over fear. For it is in such choices that kingdoms become worthy of the miracles they are given.